Ben Fagan here with another episode of Career Cash, the podcast. And on this episode, I'm joined by office production assistant for Bling Empire Season 2 on Netflix, Kevin Studer. Kevin and I talk about how to find a job in a company that fits you just as you hope to fit them, why company culture is so important, and how he made his way to Netflix. It's an awesome conversation. Let's get to it. Well, Kevin, welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have you here, and I'm excited to hear a little bit more about your story and how you got to where you are today. So welcome, my friend.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So you're working at Netflix now, and this was a long time coming. But before we dive too deep into that, can you kind of catch us up to what you do on a day-to-day basis now?
Yeah, so I am a production assistant on one of Netflix's reality shows called Bling Empire. We're currently working on their second season and going into a third season, but the first season premiered on Netflix earlier this year. So as a production assistant, I work mainly in the office, and I do the kind of catch-all activities for the show. So I'm the one, I kind of joke sometimes that it's a little bit like Anne Hathaway in The Devil Wears Prada, but with like nicer bosses. Um, but I do the smaller things like getting lunch orders and picking up lunch and also doing coffee orders and all of that. But then I work with the producers on picking up the equipment that we need to film the show. I'll drive all around LA and kind of the Southern California area, picking up, cameras, equipment, just taking the media that we film every day to our post-production office where it can start to be edited into what you actually see on TV. And it's really a job where it's like, whatever they ask me to do, I do it. And I always like being that person where like your day is never going to look the same. And you're just kind of always on your feet and doing whatever is, important for that day.
Awesome. That's so cool. And what's so awesome about this, and the part that I'm excited about, is we got the good fortune to actually see you in person yesterday. So that was a lot of fun getting to catch up briefly.
Yeah.
And you recently started at Netflix, and this was a long time coming. So can you kind of talk on that journey from, let's say, graduating to getting to this point? And I know it's a big winding road. So what do you have for that?
Yeah, so I graduated from Lynn in 2015 with my degree in multimedia journalism. I then stayed here for a year and did my master's in communication and media studies. And then I was starting to apply for jobs. And in the summer of 2016, I ended up applying for 52 jobs. And I had interviews some places just completely passed me up. But nothing was really sticking, and some of them, like, I just felt like I wasn't the right fit or the company wasn't the right fit for me, and same on the other side, they didn't think I was the right fit for them. So I actually had the opportunity to go to Ireland for a year to American College Dublin, which I had studied abroad at before, and be a graduate assistant in their Office of Admission. And so I did that for a year. I moved to Dublin, Ireland, and that was a crazy year, but it was so rewarding. And then when I came back, I was like, okay, I worked in higher education for a year, but that's not what I want to do with my life. I want to get back into journalism. But for the time being, I needed money. And so I started working with the Office of Admission again, giving tours here. And that kind of like led into a part-time role with the office that then led into a full-time role in the office. So I worked from about July through April before I got hired on full time. And then I got hired as the campus visit coordinator in Lynn's Office of Admission. And I ended up staying here for 3 years. And it was shortly before the pandemic started that I had visited LA for the third time and knew that that was where I wanted to move in. I wanted to get into film and television. So I was really lucky in admission that I had an amazing supervisor, Tiara Thompson, who, when I told her that I wanted to move to LA, she went, okay, how are we going to do it? And so it wasn't about, trying to keep me here. She knew that that's what my goal was, and she wanted to help me achieve that. So we started to make some moves, and then the pandemic started, and then I stayed on because I wasn't going to leave a job that was paying me. But then Gareth and Taryn in admission were actually really receptive when I brought up to them that maybe I could work remotely from California. And so after figuring out a lot of logistics, I moved to California last September, and I worked remotely for admission through the end of the school year, so through the end of May. And 2 days, I was getting really stressed because I was doing a lot of interviewing and a lot of like connection making. And 2 days before I finished at Lynn, I got offered the Netflix role. Um, and the timing just worked out perfectly. I ended up starting at Netflix the Saturday after I finished Lynn on Friday. Um, and I just jumped right in. I had no idea what I was doing. I had never been a production assistant, but luckily, a lot of my experience in the Office of Admission helped set me up to be successful as a production assistant. Um, and I was just, it's called day playing in the entertainment industry, where you're kind of like, it's kind of like a substitute teacher where you're just jumping in for, whoever you're covering for a few days. But then they ended up liking me, and they moved the production assistant I was day playing for into a different position, and then they kept me on full time. So I've been working pretty much full time with this show for about 4 months now.
Wow. There are just so many different ways and paths we could go down with this, which I love. But trying to remain with some level of focus here. Was Netflix the company for you, or was it more I wanted to be in LA and be around that environment?
So I think it was a little bit of both. Like I wanted to be in LA, I wanted to be in film and television, and Netflix is obviously one of the biggest companies out there right now. I know like Hulu and Amazon Prime are definitely big competitors for Netflix now, but Netflix for years has been like the ultimate streaming service, and they're really great at creating like not just a ton of content, but also a ton of diverse content. So you see um, different genders, different races, different sexual orientations, and that's what I really love. And even when I was in journalism here, and then when I was doing my creative writing degree in Ireland, I was really big on showing the diversity of people in the world. And so now the show that I'm working on focuses on Asian American culture. And I feel really, really blessed actually that I get to work on a show that's not, and I say this being white, but a show that's just about white people and their lifestyles. Um, so Netflix was definitely always like right at the top of my list of where I wanted to work. And luckily, it all worked out for me and I got there.
Awesome. Backtracking to the 52 jobs there, which is absolutely outstanding. Then, and that's one of those things that I think needs to be emphasized a little bit. Is there's so much that more that goes into it. You can't send out your one job, your two job applications, and
Oh,
send
yeah.
anything back. Now, and what was that process like? Of what were your thoughts going through your head? We were sending out 52 because that's a lot, and it can be defeating at
Yeah.
times. I'm sure. What was that like?
Oh, definitely. It was intense. And the thing about applying for jobs is every website you're filling in the same information over and over again. You're saying your experience, you're saying your education, you're putting your address, social security number, everything. And it's a lot of work. And what I did, which I've talked to other friends who have gone through the same thing, is I ended up keeping an Excel spreadsheet just to be like, okay, this is where I've applied. This is the job that I've applied for. This is when I applied. So, like kind of the timeline. So you can like follow up in a week and see if, they got your resume or whatever the case is. And then also that way, when you're applying for a lot of jobs in a short amount of time, you might not realize that you've already applied for a job, and you'll see it online and you'll be like, that sounds like a good job. And lo and behold, you already applied for it and you don't want to apply twice. Um, so there were definitely defeating moments. I was applying for both jobs in higher education and in the journalism field, since that's where my experience was within both of those. And it was it was a lot. And I remember having phone calls, and like there are certain phone calls you have where like when you hang up, that just did not go the way you wanted it to, and you're like, oh well, I guess I'm going to scratch them off my list. And then there are phone calls you have where you're hopeful, and then you don't hear anything for a couple of weeks, and you follow up and they're like, we actually just hired someone else, and you're like, okay. So I think I started applying for the first couple jobs in like February or March of that year when I was still here on campus. And then once graduation happened, I really like jumped into the application game. And it was August before I really had the moment of, okay, none of these jobs are working out. I have to figure out what I'm going to do. And I was really close to, when I was here, I was an RA for 2 years and a CA for 1 year. And Megan and Hannah had both worked at Nova Southeastern before. And I had applied for a job in the housing department at Nova, and they had put in pretty good recommendations for me. And I was actually really close to getting that Nova job. And I was doing my on campus interview. And I just realized during the day that day, I was like, I don't want to do housing for the rest of my life. And that is not, that's not my goal. And I came back from that interview and I went to dinner with some friends and I was telling them about it. And they were like, look, if you're already having doubts about this, then that's probably not the right path for you. And so after like talking it through with my friends and my parents, I ended up making the decision the following Monday to email them and take my name out of the running. And I think that's a good thing for people to know, that like when you get into interviews, as much as the interview is about you impressing the company, it's also about the company impressing you, and you just realizing that like that is where you want to be. And if you do have those moments during the interviews where you're like, I'm not feeling the company culture, or maybe this isn't the position I want, or whatever the case is, know that you don't have to go through with it if they offer you the job, or if you just want to take your name out of the running.
No, I think that's such an important piece. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I was thinking about the same thing when you talked about that being a attractive factor of Netflix, being it's so diverse in culture. And then earlier
Yeah.
when you did mention you're going through this whole process of applying to all these jobs, some were a good fit for you, but not for them, and some were they thought you were a good fit, but you didn't feel the same about them. So what were some of the things that you look for outside of diversity, and how did you handle and balance the fact that you want to go into your ideal job and have all your boxes checked off, but realistically you can't have all of them checked off? So how did you balance that?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me is culture. And I learned that while I was a student worker here, that culture is so important, making sure you're working with people you like and enjoy spending time with. And so when I worked in the Office of Admission here, both as a student and when I was full time, I loved the people that I worked with. And I think that's one of the things that kept me here for 3 years, even though I knew higher education wasn't my like destiny, was that I loved the people that I was working with. I had created a family with my coworkers, and that's what was important to me. But outside of culture, it's just making sure that you're going to be challenged, making sure it's a company that is reputable and that like you can be proud of saying that you're working for that company. And I honestly, I think those are the most important things. But when going into this Netflix role, so in kind of the hierarchy of titles you can go into, I was a coordinator here in admission, the campus visit coordinator. And so I ended up dropping a level, going back down to an assistant, working with Netflix. And it's not necessarily something that I wanted to do. Like I wanted to stay at a coordinator level, but I knew I didn't have that experience, and I knew that's what I needed to gain. And even if I felt like I had what checked off the boxes on the job description, because I didn't have film and TV on my resume, they weren't looking at it as if I had that experience. And so I think one of the things you have to think about when you're checking off the boxes is, don't be afraid, like if you're going into a different career path or a different field, like of dropping down a level for just a little bit to get your foot in the door. And I have a friend who lives out in LA who he is trying to get back into entertainment, and he is trying to go for like really high positions, and he hasn't been in it for a while, so he doesn't have that continued experience, and he's not getting the jobs because he's not willing to drop down a level. And I know that's been tough on him. So I always think that's a good piece of advice, is to just like be willing to go with the flow and be willing to do whatever it takes to get you like think about your end goal, and if you need to like kind of take a step back at points to get to that end goal, do it.
And that takes a certain level of checking the ego and putting that aside. And was
Yeah.
that something that was difficult for you, or is that something that kind of came more naturally, or how did you approach that aspect to be able to take that step down?
I think for me, it came a little more naturally. And I don't want to say that I'm like this, I have this great mind, spirit, and energy and everything, but I, I knew going into it that I was probably going to have to take a step down, and I was still applying for coordinator roles, but I was also looking up assistant roles, um, just because I knew that's what it was going to take to get me into that field. I also was, when I was looking at jobs, a lot of my friends were already in the industry, my friends who are out in LA, and they would have conversations with me about, okay, this is where you should probably start, this is how you get your foot in the door. And then once you get into the field, it's really easy to make connections and move up, but it's getting that foot in the door that is so important. And if you need to take the step back, do it. And so I was like, you know what, anything that gets me in the door, I'll do it. And I ended up being really lucky getting into Netflix as like the first job, because a lot of times you'll kind of do the grinding on working on lots of like small independent projects. Um, but luckily, one of my friends out in LA is a producer on the show. And so when they were looking for someone to day play as a production assistant, he threw my name out there. And literally, the way that I started was, I got a text from one of the producers that said, hey, we're looking for someone to come in for a day tomorrow to sub for our current PA. Would you be interested? And I just said yes. And like, didn't think about it, didn't do anything. I just said yes. I was actually still working here at the time. And I was in my last 2 weeks, and I texted Taryn here, and I was like, I need to take a sick day tomorrow because Netflix wants me to work for them. And she was like, ah. And I was like, I gotta go. It's Netflix. She's like, no, you're right. Go. And so um, I that's what I did, and it all ended up working out.
So you're coming in as right now currently working as a production assistant, like you said earlier, where part of the job is you're picking up the orders, you're running coffee, you're doing those smaller tasks. And
Yeah.
I think that if you don't go in with a certain mindset, that's all that job is and that's all it will represent. But like you're saying, for you and how you're treating it, it's an opportunity to get your foot in the door, and that's a part of the job, but it's not entirely that. So how can you approach that so you're taking full advantage of the opportunity and not letting it just be, oh, you're just the coffee runner, because you're not. It's an opportunity for you to learn and grow. So how do you
Yeah.
approach that?
Well, I think the most important thing is you have to keep a good outlook on everything. And if you go into a job and you have a pessimistic attitude and you're just like, I hate this job, I don't like what I'm doing, that's what you're going to feel while you're there because you're going in with that mindset. But if you go in and you're like, you know, this might not be exactly what I want to do, but like I'm watching these producers and one day that's going to be me. Like that's the attitude that keeps you going, and that's what drives you to do what you're doing. And I think something that was kind of cool for me was some of the tasks that I'm doing, like one of the things I do is stock the fridge, twice a day, make sure the drinks are cold. And working in admission, I had done that as a student worker, and then when I became the coordinator, I had my students do it, and so it was like something I was used to, and it was like, oh, I'm just going back to what I did, before I was a supervisor, and I'm not a supervisor anymore, so this makes sense that this is what I'm doing. um, and I talk to people out in LA who are production assistants on different things, and they're like, oh yeah, I hate that I just, like I'm in my car driving all day, going to these different places. And I'm like, I don't understand why people hate driving so much. I'm like, I jump in my car, I put on whatever music I want, and I'm getting paid not only like my paycheck, but also I get mileage to drive around LA. So like I'm getting paid to drive and I'm just listening to whatever music I want. And then at the same time, since a lot of times I'm driving like 20, 30 minutes to different places, um, that's the time I use to talk to, the people here that I'm on a different time zone with. Cause like I used to FaceTime my parents at night, but since I don't get to see them during the weekdays, I'll just call my mom or my dad while I'm out on the road and check in on them and make sure everything's good. Um, and that cuts down the drive time. And like honestly love driving, and so I go for drives each day.
So here's the most hard-hitting question to date right here. What's the go-to song, go-to artist when you're on the drive today?
Oh, um, you know, I've been going through a lot because since I do drive so much, it's like I keep having to like create new playlists because I'm like, I've been listening to this playlist forever. I recently got into BTS, which I had never been into, but um, I like listening to them, even their Korean language songs, just because like it's a really good beat and keeps me going. Because sometimes I get a little tired while I'm driving, but um, Lizzo just came out with her new song, Rumors, and
I've been on a Lizzo kick as of the past 2 days, so I feel you on that one. I feel you.
I've been a Lizzo fan for a couple of years now. So like as soon as that came out, I was like on repeat. Let's go.
Yep. Beautiful. I love that. So before we wrap up, as you talked about where you will be one day, so where does Kevin Studer see himself one day? What's the goal here for you?
Yeah, so definitely a hard question. I really want to see myself get into the creative development for live action, either television shows or films, scripted shows. So right now I'm in the reality world, but I do look to move into the scripted world. Um, my degree from Ireland is a creative writing master's, and so I was um, writing short stories and novels, and creating characters. And I love the the thing that I love most about watching TV is when you see a character and you feel like it's representing yourself. And I would love to be part of the process that helps make those characters and create those characters for everyone. Um, I know being in the LGBT community that when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of LGBTQ characters on TV, and now you're seeing so many of them. And I'm watching TV shows, and I'm like, if I had this when I was 15, 16, like my whole experience could have been different. And I don't regret any part of my coming out experience or anything like that. But it's nice to see that this generation is starting to see more diversity in everything that I said before: sexuality, race, gender, religion, everything like that. And they're able to see themselves on TV. And so I want to be in the room where that happens. So creative development or producing on a show where I also get to be part of the decision making, like that's my end goal.
And the room where it happens, I know that was a subtle nod to Hamilton, you being a big musical theater buff. So I saw it. I knew what you were doing there. So I love it.
Yeah.
So now we are at the end of the show where we finish up, where it's time to cash out. And this is where you leave us with your most valuable, money-filled piece of advice that you have for us. What do you have for us today?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about it before, but I think the most important thing you can do is making sure that the environment you're working in is the environment you want to work in. My days are 12-hour days, so I work about 60 to 70 hours a week. And so I'm with my coworkers for those 60 to 70 hours. And if I didn't like my coworkers, this would be a terrible job because you're gonna, and you'll realize, students will realize when they get into the professional world that you're seeing your coworkers and you're at work more than you're at home and with your significant other, your family, or whoever it is, your dog. And so you need to make sure that those people are the people you want to be with. And if you get into a situation where you're like, you know what, this is a toxic environment, I don't want to be here anymore, you can leave. Something my mom has always said to me and my sister is that, like, don't ever be dedicated to a specific company because you are always replaceable. So if you want to leave, if you have another opportunity that's better for you, like, you can leave because someone else will come into your place, and they might not be able to do the same job you did, or they might be better, but that's for that company to figure out down the line. So just make sure you love what you do and love where you are. And I know it's kind of cliche that people say, if you're happy, you're never going to work a day in your life. And I mean, I'm still working, but I love what I do and I'm happy doing it. And so I feel like, the hours go by so fast, and that's definitely the most important part to me.
Hearing that gets me so excited. I just love being around people like you. And so I'm excited for what's to come. I know you're going to get to the top in whatever it is that you want to do. So I'm just proud to be a witness of it all. So Kevin, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Ben.